Hello, history enthusiasts. Welcome back to the channel. Today, we're going on a deep dive into one of the most fascinating practices of ancient Egypt, mummification. Why did the Egyptians go to such lengths to preserve their dead, and how did they manage to keep these bodies intact for thousands of years? In this video, we'll explore everything from the origins and religious significance of mummification to the intricate step-by-step process that made it possible. Stick around because you won't want to miss this. Mummification as we know it didn't begin overnight. In fact, the practice evolved over thousands of years. Early forms of mummification date back to around 3500 BCE, during the early dynastic period of Egypt. Back then, the mummification process wasn't as elaborate as it would become later, but the concept of preserving the dead was already taking shape. At first, the preservation methods were fairly simple. The Egyptians would bury their dead in shallow graves, and the desert's hot, dry climate would naturally dry out the bodies, preserving them. Over time, the Egyptians realized that drying the body could prevent decay and allow the deceased to remain in a recognizable form. But as Egyptian culture grew more complex, so did their views on death and the afterlife. It was around 2500 BCE, during the Old Kingdom period, that mummification began to evolve into a more formalized and religious practice. Mummification wasn't just about preserving a body. It was a deeply spiritual practice tied to the Egyptian belief in the afterlife. The Egyptians believed that life after death was not just a continuation of existence, but a transformation into a divine realm. Anubis, the god of mummification, played a central role in this process. He was depicted as a jackal-headed god who, according to Egyptian belief, guided the deceased's soul through the underworld to their final judgment. Anubis was also responsible for overseeing the embalming and mummification process to ensure that the body was properly prepared for its journey. Egyptians believed that to enter the afterlife, the soul had to be judged by Osiris, the god of the dead. If the heart of the deceased was lighter than the feather of Ma'at, representing truth and justice, they were granted eternal life. To ensure this, the body had to remain intact, so the soul could recognize it and reunite with it in the afterlife. Now, let's take a closer look at the step-by-step mummification process that allowed the Egyptians to preserve their dead for thousands of years. This process was intricate and took about 70 days to complete. Step 1. Washing and purification. The body was washed with palm wine and water from the Nile to purify it. The priests would then perform rituals to invoke blessings from the gods, ensuring that the deceased would have a safe journey into the afterlife. Step 2. Removal of the internal organs. The internal organs were removed because they were considered the first parts of the body to decompose. The brain, for example, was often removed through the nose and discarded. However, the heart was typically left inside the body because it was believed to be the seat of the soul and would later be weighed against the feather of Ma'at. The stomach, intestines, lungs and liver were placed into 4 canopic jars, each protected by a different deity. These jars were sealed and placed beside the body in the tomb. Step 3. Dehydrating the body. After the organs were removed, the body was coated in natron, a naturally occurring salt, and left to dry for about 40 days. Natron was used because it absorbed moisture, effectively preventing decay. Cut to visuals of the body being wrapped in linen. Step 4. Wrapping the body. Once the body was dried, it was carefully wrapped in linen bandages. This process could take up to 15 days. Each layer of linen was coated with resin, which acted as glue and helped preserve the body further. Step 5. Placement of amulets and charms. Amulets and charms were placed between the layers of linen to protect the deceased in the afterlife. These included the famous Eye of Horus amulet, which was believed to offer protection against evil spirits. Step 6. Final wrapping and sealing. After the body was fully wrapped, it was placed in a wooden or stone coffin. The coffin was often intricately decorated with hieroglyphs and images of the deceased's life. Finally, the body was sealed inside a tomb, which was carefully stocked with food, clothing, and even servant statues to provide for the deceased in the afterlife. The Egyptians believed that death was not the end, but a transition into the afterlife, where the deceased would live forever, provided they were properly prepared. Wealthy Egyptians, like pharaohs, were buried with vast amounts of treasure, including jewelry, food, and even chariots. To guide the deceased through the afterlife, Egyptians included texts from the Book of the Dead. These were collections of spells and incantations that would protect the deceased from dangers in the afterlife, ensuring their safe passage to the realm of Osiris. Mummification wasn't limited to humans. Ancient Egyptians also mummified animals, believing they could accompany their owners in the afterlife or serve as offerings to the gods. Cats, ibises, and crocodiles were particularly sacred and were preserved in much the same way as humans. Interestingly, mummification was practiced by other ancient cultures too, including the Chinchorro people in what is now Chile, who predated the Egyptians. Though their techniques were different, their goal was the same: to preserve the body for the afterlife. As Egypt went through periods of foreign rule, including the Greeks and Romans, the practice of mummification slowly began to decline. The Romans, in particular, didn't see the need for mummification in their religious practices, and as a result, the process faded. Today, mummified bodies provide a unique glimpse into the lives of ancient Egyptians. Through modern science, archaeologists have been able to learn more about their diets, diseases, and even their daily activities. So that's a complete look at the ancient Egyptian practice of mummification. It's incredible to think that these elaborate rituals were not only about preserving the dead, but about ensuring immortality in the afterlife. Thanks for joining me on this fascinating journey into the past. If you found this video interesting, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more deep dives into history.